Welcome back, horror fiends, to another deep cut from the vaults of resurrected horrors. And this time, we're not just raising the dead, we're bringing them back for round two. That's right, Monster Pictures has announced their latest Monster Fest Weekender, and this year they're going full sequel mode. And not just any sequels, bigger, bloodier, bolder. Sometimes better, sometimes much, much worse. So, what makes a horror sequel work? What turns a promising follow up into an unforgettable nightmare or a shambling, soulless cash grab? Tonight, we're dissecting that very question with a lineup that includes some of the most infamous, underrated, and downright bizarre horror sequels ever made. Buckle up, because this is Monster Fest Weekender 3 Part 2 The Spawning. And just like any good sequel, the stakes are deadlier, the body count is higher, and somehow the titles are even longer. Before we rip into the films themselves, let's talk about the secret formula behind a successful horror sequel. Because, believe it or not, there is science to this. A dark, blood-stained science that determines whether a sequel thrives or dies a slow, painful death at the box office. Rule 1. Identify that. Rule 1. Identify what made the film great. Every horror classic has a beating heart, a core concept, a style, or an atmosphere that made it unforgettable. A good sequel understands this. It doesn't just slap a bigger budget onto the story and call it a day, it digs deep into what made the original special. Rule 2. Respect the source material. A sequel never should spit in the face of its predecessor. When a follow up ignores the rules, the themes, or even the tone of the original, it doesn't just disappoint, it actively destroys what came before it. Rule 3. Expand naturally. Don't contradict the first film. Horror sequels thrive when they build on existing mythology. The best ones give us new angles, new terrors, new layers to the nightmare without undermining what came before. When a sequel starts rewriting its own history, well, that's when we're going to get into trouble. Rule 4. Don't just give us more of the same. A great horror sequel doesn't just recycle its predecessor's scares, it reinvents, it evolves. If all you're doing is repeating the same beats, the audience will see it coming a mile away. Rule 5. Don't just go bigger for the sake of it. More gore, more kills, more explosions. Bigger isn't always better. Sometimes stripping things back can be just as effective. The question is, does the sequel need to be bigger, or is it just trying to outdo itself without a reason? And rule 6. A sequel should stand on its own. If you can't enjoy the movie without watching the original, the sequel has failed. A truly great follow-up should enhance the first film, not rely on it like a crutch. Now that we know the rules, let's put them to the test. Here's the Monster Fest Weekender 3 lineup, and trust me, some of these sequels follow the formula to perfection, while others throw the rulebook straight into the wood chipper. Number 1, Return of the Living Dead Part 2. The first Return of the Living Dead was punk rock horror perfection. Fast moving zombies, nihilistic humour, and one of the best horror soundtracks of all time. The sequel? Well, it tries. It brings some of the same actors in new roles, but the rebellious bite is gone. Instead of subverting zombie horror, it plays like a watered down imitation of the first. Rule 4 violation. More of the same without the spark. Number 2, Phantasm 2. Now, this is how you do a horror sequel. Phantasm 2 takes the dreamy surrealism of the first film and injects a healthy dose of 80s action horror. More guns, more gore, but without sacrificing the eerie, reality bending atmosphere that made Phantasm so unique. A prime example of Rule 3 done right, expanding the lore without contradicting the past. Number 3 is Predator 2. Jungle to city, Arnold to Glover. Predator 2 swaps out the sweaty, dense foliage of the first film for the grimy, crime-ridden streets of Los Angeles. It's ambitious, but does it work? Well, it certainly introduces some cool new ideas. Hello, Xenimal Skull. But it also struggles to recreate the first film's tension. Rule 5 violation. Bigger, but not necessarily better. Number 4 is Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. This one digs deeper into Candyman's past, revealing more about his tragic origins. But is knowing too much a good thing? The original Candyman thrived on mystery and suggestion. This sequel lifts the veil a little too much, stripping away some of the dread. Rule 2 violation. Sometimes less is more. Number 5, I still know what you did last summer. How do you ruin an already shaky slasher? You relocate it to the Bahamas and throw in some nonsensical plot twist in horror sequel history. There's one full house of violations, repeating the original, Rule 4, making things needlessly bigger, Rule 5, and failing to stand on its own, Rule 6. Let's move on. Number 6, Return to Oz. Not your typical horror sequel, let's be honest. This movie is terrifying. The Wheelers, the Gnome King, Princess Mombi's Hall of Severed Heads, it barely connects to The Wizard of Oz, but it does follow Rule 6. It stands completely on its own as a dark fantasy nightmare. Number 7, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Toby Hooper knew he couldn't outdo the raw terror of the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so instead he leaned into black comedy and over-the-top gore. It's a cult classic now, but at the time, people weren't sure what to make of it. Rule 4 success, not just more of the same. At number 8, Bride of Reanimator. More bodies, more mayhem, more Herbert West. This sequel dials up the madness of Reanimator, keeping the gruesome horror intact. Does it surpass the first? No, but it understands the assignment. So what have we learned? The best horror sequels don't just exist. They justify their own existence. They evolve, they expand, they terrify in new ways. And the worst ones, they just remind us why the original was so much better. Either way, we'll still watch them all. Thanks for listening. I'm Saul Muerte.